Thank you all for joining. Q2 has been in full swing for everyone, and I know that we are literally in the last week of the quarter, so very, very appreciative that you've all made some time to join us for the LGBTQIA plus hug. Um, just a quick reminder here, if you haven't joined one of these before, we run the LGBTQIA plus hug. So the thing that we all know and love is HubSpot, and the thing that makes this hug special and different is the community that we kind of bring together for it. So we tend to think that this is an any old hug, and I think the format of this one today is a little bit more different. We are actually doing a an in conversation with type format today. So I will run into introductions in a second. Something that we also love as well is just the different perspectives that everyone brings. So different experiences, shared growth, different leadership, different people from the community doing great things, not only with the tool, but also outside of the tool. So very, very appreciative and happy that you're all here to join us today. And also happy Pride Month. We are in June, the best month of the year, arguably, because some people have birthdays then. It's Pride, it's Gemini season. Everyone's having a good time here already. But I'm going to kick us over into some introductions here. So some of you might have met me before. If not, I'm Dia. I'm head of our client delivery and strategy here at Digital Reach, a nonprofit tech shop. I like to think that I help organizations think differently about how they should use HubSpot, not entirely as a CRM, but also as a tool that helps how teams work, communicate, and grow together. I'm super proud to host this quarter's hug. You'll see Karen here on the side. We usually do these together, but we have split away this time. Not for any reason, just because we're doing it a little bit differently today. So super proud to be hosting this one today. This space means a lot to me because it's more than just like the systems and the strategy. It's about community, connection, honest conversations about all, the work that we're all doing in our day-to-days. So very, very excited about this one today. Today's conversation for me is it's especially exciting, and I know Kyle might agree as well. It's because we're talking about something that I care deeply about, and that's building systems around people and not forcing people to fit into the systems. So we will touch on that a little bit today here. At the end of the day, the best CRM in the world it doesn't matter who built it, what it was built for, if it doesn't do what you want your team to be doing in it. So very excited for this one. I am going to kick it over to Kyle here and I guess introduce our guest for the day. Very quickly, Kyle is the Chief Operating Officer at NHOMS, and he leads operations across complex multi-location sites. So I'm not going to butcher his intro. I am actually going to kick it over to him to tell us a little bit about himself.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I don't think you could butcher it anything really, but I appreciate the opportunity to introduce myself. So, hi everybody. Thanks so much for welcoming me in. My name is Kyle. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here. We are an oral surgery practice with 12 locations across Massachusetts and New Hampshire, with our headquarters being in Nashua, New Hampshire, right on the southern border, right by Massachusetts. We're about 160 employees strong at the moment. We've gone through quite a bit of growth in the last 5 years that I've been with the organization. We started off as about 60 employees and 4 locations when I started. So we've definitely gone through some growth and have had some pretty interesting shifts in our strategy, both from a market presence and also just general kind of operations and rev ops side of things. So it'll be kind of an interesting conversation for us today to dive into, as Dia was wording it, the idea of matching a system to a process as opposed to changing all of your processes to match a tool. And it's similar to Dia where she's talking about things that she's particularly passionate about. For me, I always call myself the aspiring CXO kind of a role. I'm someone who's really passionate about kind of sitting at the crux between what we are putting forth as our brand promise from a marketing perspective and then delivery from an operational perspective, both for our clientele and our patients here in the healthcare space, but also for our employees. And so a lot of the themes that you'll be hearing about today kind of tie into that idea of how we've managed to make that work with this powerful tool. And hopefully you'll find it to be a worthwhile conversation for you to participate in today. So thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Kyle. And it's great for you to have you here, really. I'm really excited about this conversation. So I guess let's kick it off. So when you first joined NOMS, what was the biggest operational challenge that made you think, I think HubSpot could solve this better?
Yeah, I mean it was a really interesting time for the practice. So we primarily were a kind of a word of mouth, it's kind of Spider-Man-y to say it this way, but we were your friendly neighborhood oral surgeon, right? We were kind of just a mainstay in the community that have been here for a great number of years, a couple decades at this point. And back in 2021, 2022, we kind of switched gears and realized that the market was changing to be kind of at the point where we were looking more at what the direct to consumer market was. And we were primarily a referral based kind of B2B organization where that's really where we kept our relationships the strongest. And we would receive patients through a referral pipeline that was very simple. They would send us a card that had the information for the patient on it. They would send us an email, let us know that this patient was ready to be contacted for treatment. And that was really the bread and butter of what we did. And as the landscape of the oral surgery space had started to change, we realized that there was opportunity and also in many ways necessity to start stepping into the D2C space. And with that came a full host of new sales processes. We wanted to launch meta campaigns. We wanted more Google campaigns. We wanted to be really more robust in our approach. And we didn't have a way to track that. So in the healthcare space, in surgical spaces, we have to be very data oriented when it comes to how we record patient visits. But in terms of patient acquisition, that's generally something that a lot of the softwares that we would use to record the kind of the care side of what we do is lost. And so we needed a tool that was going to be able to provide that. But because of the nature of the information we were looking for, we also needed to make sure it was HIPAA compliant, which the enterprise level of HubSpot includes, built into it. And we wanted to also be able to link into the open API that our medical record software had. So something like HubSpot that was adaptable to both of those things opened up a space for us to be able to really kind of step in that direction. And so we realized very quickly we were just managing our patient records on this one system and we were going to track everything to we need to understand the life cycle of this patient before they hit our chair and then what that RevOps side of it really looks like afterwards and how do we target these patients? How do we re-engage them, retarget? And we just didn't have a system for that. So as we were shopping around, HubSpot quickly became kind of a go-to tool for us because it made the most sense based on how many strict restrictions we needed to stay within.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that so many, I guess, clients face, right? You have all of these needs and you're like, surely there isn't one thing that can do it. But I think what people fail to, I guess, like comprehend is how customizable HubSpot is. And once you kind of sink your teeth into knowing that bit of information, like I guess the world is your oyster, right?
For sure. And it's so trainable too, which is something that we were really concerned about because we had a lot of really well-trained medical professionals.
Hmm.
These were folks that were really dedicated to delivering exceptional patient care. And we
Hmm.
were going to flip everything on their heads, right? We were going from just you need to record the surgery or the consultation to we need to understand lead attribution and we need to understand, the actual life cycle of this patient in terms of the revenue side of it so we could make sure there was an ROI on a campaign. And we had to teach all of those basic principles and then also teach them how to use the platform. So for us, finding something that was trainable and adaptable was definitely kind of a piece of that pie for us as well, because we didn't have what you would consider them naturally sales oriented because this is what we do in a service industry, but
Yeah.
they were not necessarily used to that kind of formal structure. You just don't see it very often in our industry.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess then it kind of leads me nicely into the next one. Um, a lot of organizations, they try to force their team to work the way the CRM works. So like you have to do this thing, you have to go into this part of the portal, you have to click these buttons. You guys took a very different approach, right? And you've just said there, like in all in essence, yes, you kind of fit within that sales type team. But how did you decide when you were going to adapt HubSpot versus when to change a process? And like, how did you actually do that with your team? Because adoption is the biggest, I guess, the biggest barrier to getting the use out of the CRM, right? So, yeah, how did you all do it?
Yeah, for sure. I love the question and I love how you framed it because it's something that's really been at the crux of what we've been trying to do at our organization for a while. This idea of, I feel that, and it's not necessarily intentional, but I feel that a lot of leaders and strategists often will forget to consider the people as one of the bigger assets to a process's success. And desired outcomes, as a deliverable are often things that we forget, like that human capital asset in terms of, the delivery of things. And so one of our core values here at NHOMS is innovation. And it's funny, core values are like kind of a sticking point for me because so easily they just become like a blank kind of definition word on a wall that's just kind of there. And like, we believe in innovation. And for us, we've taken it as kind of really just truly part of our DNA where there's really no question or no idea off the table. And
Mm,
we were almost spoiled in a way, fortunately, because we were paired up with your organization at this point, but so we had the resources and the expertise, but a lot of our team, because we collectively were naive of the capabilities of HubSpot, we just started asking questions like, well, what if we made this adjustment? Like, what if, because we do it this way, is there any way to make that happen? And there was almost never a case where we heard no as the answer. So
mm,
it was great that we were able to kind of riff off of each other and just say, well, we've been doing it this way. Is that a capability that exists? And then
mm,
kind of adapt to it, which has been really amazing and really a major contributing factor to why HubSpot's been such a great tool for us because it's so adaptable and flexible to that naive audience, right? Well, we've been doing it this way. Is there a way for us to keep that reporting process similar? Or it kind of makes sense in our heads as medical professionals to do it this way. Can we do that? And like I said, the answer was so infrequently no that really made it something that was easier to buy into. But when you look at the inverse of it, such as when HubSpot or any other tool, is something where you're going to need to adapt to, it usually really means that there's not a solid process to begin with. And
yeah,
so you're relying on a framework or you're relying on kind of a templated process that's already built native to the system that's there as an asset for you to use. And for us, that was something that was also quite beneficial. And that was something where we could kind of position it in the kind of the change management side of it of, hey, we've realized that there's 12 different ways this is happening across our 12 locations as we've continued to expand. And
hmm
there's really no one solid process. Well, I've got this great tool that has this kind of built-in way to do it that let's test it and see if this is smoother for everybody. And so a lot of times when we were kind of quote unquote adapting a process to meet HubSpot's built-ins, it was primarily because that's really what we needed was process improvement. So we kind of were able to rely on our people who were doing this every day to be able to guide us through this idea of we're really comfortable with this, and if we can make this work, amazing,
yeah,
versus we're not very comfortable over here. Is this tool a resource to solve that for us? And I think positioning it that way really opened the door for us to feel like this was an opportunity for cleaner data and higher efficiency, but it was also very much under the consideration of what our team needed versus what the company wanted the team to adjust to.
yeah. And you raised so many good points there. Like the consolidation piece is so important because you've got multiple sites, you're all doing things slightly differently, but those nuances in how the sites do things really show up in the data, right? And how people use and interact with it. So I think how you frame that there with, there's a tool that could do it. Why don't we try it? And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But deep down, you know that it's going to make their lives easier and it is going to work. So you kind of like manipulating your sites a little bit there, but knowing that operationally it is actually going to work better and in your favor. So I really like that part. And I think you also made a really good point about ultimately your team, you would use systems very differently. Like the end team member that is actually going in and using HubSpot, is sometimes likely to be a surgeon. And so, like, do they have time to do all of the admin? Do they have time to go in and root around and do all of these things? Probably not, but the way you worked your processes into molding around the tool versus like, and it's so malleable, right? So the way you were able to go in and say, look, our surgeons need to be able to see this thing rather than you can only see this thing, surgeon. You were able to go in and actually uh, create what you needed the team to see versus, show them what they could or couldn't see. So I think that's a really good point there as well. Um, all right. I love it, Kyle. Thank you. That was a super rounded answer as well. And you said so much there, which I'm probably forgetting. But you mentioned that better systems led to better communication, stronger relationships. How? I'm curious.
Yeah, from us, it was, I guess you could say it was kind of four different perspectives, right? We have our patients, we have our surgeons, we have the support staff, and then we have the referring providers that also were still sending us cases, or in many cases, it was also the inverse now, where because we were doing D2C marketing, a lot of times patients started coming in, they hadn't seen a dentist in years, they had severe dental anxiety, and we were able to bridge that gap for them and get them back access to care that they were lacking. So there were really like four major themes that we found. And they all kind of happened all at once, which is one of the reasons why it was so high impact for us to bring a CRM, especially one this robust, into our platforms. Going back to that idea of optimizing versus building the processes, for us, we were so new to D2C marketing that we needed to redefine for our practice what RevOps was and how it was going to work and how we were going to track it and what the meters for success were there. And, with anyone who's ever worked with senior leadership or a board of directors or that kind of thing, like, you oftentimes need to be able to tell the narrative of this is what we've done, this is the decision-making process we've unfolded with, these are the results so far, and as a result, we now recommend XYZ. And for us to be able to do that with cleaner, more hygienic data was a huge game changer for our partners and the board of directors to really feel fully looped in and engaged to the work that we were unfolding. Um, and I found it really interesting for us that as we started to hire and bring in an inbound sales team that were kind of like our setters that were starting, they were at the crux of that idea of setting the tone for the patient experience from day one and being able to record that and understand things like their motivations or their fears or the reasons why they filled out that lead, interest form, or what was it that got them to the point where they clicked on that CTA and actually did something with it, and for us to understand their sentiments, their concerns, their motivations before they come in the door and have that in a place where then our what we call our implant coordinators or our closers really in a sales process and our surgeons to have access to this information before the appointment. Now they're coming in the room, if we knew that a patient had a certain level of dental anxiety, we're not going to start with an x-ray on the screen. We're going to bring them into a consult room as opposed to a clinical room. We're not going to bring them where they're going to have their surgery. We're going to bring them to a nice table and chairs, and we're going to set the tone differently, and we're going to offer them a drink of water, and we're going to build an experience from the outset that's really going to drive a better experience for the patient and in turn our staff. And so that idea of that better communication not just made it easier for our implant coordinators to do their job, which strengthened their relationship with our inbound sales team, but they
Hmm.
had better relationships with our patients. And
Hmm.
then they understood them more, and there was that more human connection, which then allowed for us, because we're a specialist, so we're extremely collaborative with the general dentists and the pediatric dentists and the orthodontists in our area. We then were armed with so much more comprehensive information and knowledge that we could then bring back to our collaborators and say, hey, we've got this case we'd love to bring you in on. This is why we think you'd be such an asset to their care team. And then we started to really grow our relationships even further in our referral kind of B2B space. And so it kind of had that ancillary benefit that we really weren't anticipating, but it gave us such a stronger idea of like the comprehensive soup to nuts, start to finish patient experience that we started to understand so much more about what our practice really was, what we stood for, what we were striving for, and how we fit into our wider community. And as a result, they got more comprehensive care out of it, and we had a stronger business model. So for us, it's really helped us build, frankly, a better experience for the staff, our patients, our surgeons, and really the wider dental community. So it's been a tool that I don't think we nearly anticipated that level of benefit when we were looking at doing some direct to consumer marketing and bringing some more patients in the door. It was wild for us. It's truly been kind of transformative.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. Like being able to take, data in a system and then modify your patient experience in the dental surgery like is a it almost shouldn't be as wild as it is because not everyone does it that way. People kind of just use the data and maybe they modify an email, maybe they do different targeting with their paid media, but actually what you guys did was you went, okay, yeah, we can send them a nicer email. We can like personalize that kind of experience for them. And then you went a step further and you thought, wait a minute, this person has dental anxiety. It's on their contact record. They've had like multiple issues of this in the past. Like, how do we make the experience nicer from them? So you've literally taken it from, you know, inside HubSpot directly into the surgical practice and improve the experience, not just, digitally, but like physically as well. And I think the human element of that really like speaks volumes. And hearing you talk about it, I think it's the part that people miss, like the end user isn't someone in the team. It's the person that you're selling the product to or the person that you're, delivering the experience for. And if it meant that people were having a more comfortable dental experience, then like I think you succeeded, right?
For sure. Yeah. And I mean this, we are like we take dental anxiety and we escalate it by 1,000, right? Because we're the surgeons, right? So we're coming in, we're removing teeth, we're placing dental
Yeah.
implants into your jawbones. Sometimes we have to use your cheekbones. There's so much big language around this concept. And,
Hmm.
in some cases, like this, the whole one of the big treatment plans that we started with is essentially the removal of your remaining teeth and replacing them with these what's called a hybrid fixed denture. And so
Hmm.
it acts like real teeth when it's fully done, and you can, bite into food and your nutritional profile changes, and it's incredibly life-changing in a very positive way for a lot of patients. But
Hmm.
it's not like, hey, we're going to talk about a cleaning and a filling today. We're talking about extensive surgery, 3, 4, 5 month recovery periods.
Hmm.
So anyone's going to have some level of anxiety over that, and making sure that we can train our staff from the outset
Hmm.
to understand what their motivators are for the
Hmm.
sales perspective, but then also understand what are their greatest fears, what are their concerns, what are going to be their roadblocks, not because we want to close that sale and be able to overcome those roadblocks, which of course we want to do. We want to be able to overcome objection, but really we were looking for how do we focus on that idea of like that human centric medical support for you. And this tool really opened up a new way for us to keep that comprehensive. And so that's been really one of my favorite aspects of having a CRM like this.
No, I love that. It's not something you don't hear it all the time. Like when we speak to people about their not just their experience with HubSpot, but how they bring it into the real world. A lot of it does sit in like the digital sphere, right? And actually being able to, I always find this part mind blowing that it actually does help people. Depending on what your specialism and that kind of thing is. So, yeah, super appreciate that response. I think it's a great way to show, the folks here that you can take it beyond just using it in a digital way. It really does impact the end user in a positive way. All right. So, uh, tell me a little bit about a use case you've built in HubSpot that people outside of healthcare would be surprised by, but it's not around dental anxiety because that is a
Yeah.
really good one.
It's funny because I've gone to a couple of conferences where I'll be talking with someone and they'll say like, oh yeah, well we use HubSpot, and it's like, yeah, we love HubSpot, and they're like, but you're not like a SaaS. You're not, why are you using it? So I think even just the concept of us using a platform like HubSpot is often in and of itself surprising.
Hmm.
But I think my favorite example, I guess there's probably two, but my personal favorite is Open Dental, which is our practice management software. The
Hmm.
integration and the process, and I was going to say that we did, but you and your team really nailed it for us. But you guys had to build such a really interesting integration, which was very iterative and took quite a bit of time really to get right. And we had all sorts of different fields and things that we needed to get right. And yeah, software engineers are literally wizards. I don't know how they manage it all, but um, for us, what was so interesting is, CRMs are meant to be a sole source of truth, right? Like that's the one of the whole points of bringing one in. You want a single source of truth that you can use to make decisions and drive an organization toward its goals. But for us, we really couldn't lose the fact that we had two. Because from a medical legal standpoint and from a HIPAA security and the record keeping conditions and kind of the standards that we're required to hold ourselves to by law, we had to keep Open Dental as our practice management software the source of truth for all things clinical. So whether a surgery was completed, whether it was consultation, what took place during that consultation, what procedures took place during the surgery, all of those details had to be logged in Open Dental. And then for us as well, we're medical, we're surgical, so we work with insurance companies. So we have to bill through our practice management software. So Open Dental handles a lot of the revenue cycle side of things where we have to bill out to an insurance, submit a claim. That requires us to attach the notes and the records and the imaging, goes out to an insurance company between 30, 45, 60, in some not so fun cases, 90 days later, we're finally getting paid for those services rendered. So we had two databases, two sources of truth that both had to have clean records, but then also needed to integrate to a certain level so that we could still handle lead attribution, campaign performance, ROI on campaign. What is our conversion rates at each life cycle stage of the pipeline by campaign, by target population. And Open Dental wasn't capable of managing that side of it, but we weren't allowed to drop it and switch entirely to HubSpot for the ability for us to actually handle the revenue cycle portion of what we do. So for us, it was so interesting watching this process develop of how we were going to integrate the systems and go from two sources of truth that still came back to one in HubSpot where we could actually see the performance and track it. And so I think it's definitely unique to us. And I think outside of healthcare, there's kind of this shock and awe over the idea of, we do services and then we might get paid 90 days later if the insurance company liked our records. It's interesting. It's really an interesting approach that I think we've come to find as a challenge that might be a little bit more unique and a little bit surprising to organizations. But I think on the flip, it was also our CE portal that we built, which I loved. So we are also a provider of continuing education for dental professionals,
Hmm.
and we wanted to create a more bespoke experience for the participants in those programs. And we wanted to drive registrations, but we also wanted to drive a better experience, access to your CE credits, be able to audit what you have taken, maybe register for future classes, refer a friend to the program. And so we worked with the Digital Reach team to start building out a portal, essentially a web space where they could register for courses. They could have a login for their individual account where they could access the historical courses they've taken, look at our live on demand webinars and refer friends to the program, sign up for future, re-register for the next year, and kind of create a more, I guess that's the best way to word it, a bespoke experience for people to actually have like a self-serve portal, which as part of a CRM is really an interesting approach as well. So we gave them an opportunity to kind of take care of their own lead management in many ways. They could sign up for programs, try a free trial, but then we had that data on the back end that we could re-engage them as needed. So it was a really useful tool for us as well to bring that on. And I think that's also probably something that you might agree is a little bit more unique, a little bit different use case for HubSpot for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the customer portal can be used in so many different ways, and I think people, if they've got an element of customer service that they provide, they fall to the portal, for its use case, which is I need to go in and manage the ticket that I've submitted and see the status and, maybe IT teams use it as uh, like a an IT desk and you want to go in and see like where your laptop repair is up to and that kind of thing. But actually the way you all used it with the continuing education piece, very, very niche, but kind of achieved all of the same things. And like you said, you had that data then, so you could re-engage those people and say, hey, you did this course, maybe you'd be interested in something that's similar. And so you have that data, which I think is super powerful. For sure, especially in your industry when you do offer that, post graduation continuing education piece. So yeah, super, super niche use cases. I really love the open dental one. It really bridged that gap between not just your revenue cycle, but being able to like, attach scans and the treatment provided and all of that kind of stuff and really close the loop on the full, I guess the full package that you all offered. So very, very cool indeed. I'm biased as well, but yeah, very, very cool. I've seen HubSpot being used in a multitude of ways, and that was a first for me. So great stuff there. Um, all right. So, if you were to go back to the start of your HubSpot journey, and like you guys have come such a long way as well, as an organization. So, using it in different ways, you've really kind of like broken outside of the box and I guess the template of what people would normally do. What's one thing that you would build differently now, knowing what you know now versus what you did at the start?
Yeah, how many hours do we have for today's session? Yeah, no, it's it's really interesting. I think a lot about this pretty frequently for our organization just because there's so many different angles that we could have taken or chose not to. But I think one of the big ones that really stands out to me kind of quickly is we started off with too many life cycle stages. We were trying to track too granular of a process. We had options for them to put like I sent a text message, I made a call, I left a voicemail, I'm waiting for a call back. These were all stages in the potential options of where they were in the pipeline, as opposed to, contacted, connected, consultation booked, surgery completed, going to manufacturing. And it got very messy at first. There were almost too many options, and it made it hard for us to understand where in the life cycle we were getting stuck. And so instead of just creating like a contact note, we were kind of stuck in this, well, they're stuck in the texting stage or they're in the voicemail stage. And it was too open-ended. It created a situation where lead tracking got a little bit complicated as well. Um, One thing that we also found really interesting about our use case was patients would often see our ads, but then they would Google us. And given that we have 12 locations, they would Google and they'd see which location was closest to them. And then they would just hit call, right? So now they're calling a front desk line as opposed to calling our sales line that we had pushed out via our advertisements. So now they're calling our front desk, and the front desk professionals might not be either immediately logged into HubSpot, or they may not even have access if they weren't on the sales team routinely, especially when we were starting out. So the workaround there was, how do we track these leads? They're coming in, they should be attributed to a campaign, but now they're coming in the door through a different pathway. And so we ended up solving that by creating what we called our lead tracker form. So essentially it was the same kind of a form that maybe a patient who was interested would fill out, attached to an advertisement, but instead it was on our employees' desktops. And they would fill it out as, I took a call. The patient mentioned they saw a Google ad or they saw an ad for us on Facebook and they're interested in implants. And it would give us that start and it would launch it. And then one of our inbound teams would follow up with them, just make sure their questions were answered. We had the pre-qualifiers that we needed and tried to get them set up as a qualified lead with the right team. And so that solved a lot of that problem. But for us, what we noticed we were running into is that data governance got really wonky when we were, wonky being the technical term, when we were diving into these lead tracker forms, because it wasn't always necessarily clear for the end user which fields were dire importance, which ones were
Mhm.
required. Where does this data go for reporting? Who needs that data? Who's going to clean it up? Who's accountable for tracking those leads once they come in the door? Because they're kind of an atypical lead generation point. They didn't come through, a CTA. They came in through organic call, technically.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting switch for us to figure out what we were going to do with it. And I think on that end, if we had taken a little bit more time up front to make sure that we had more access to internal super users and
Hmm.
really have a good idea of who your kind of local rep was for our use case would have been probably a huge step for us in the right direction. Just because again, it was such a new tool for us and we were ramping up so quickly. I think for us to have set up more escalations processes and more super users and who your internal resources were
Hmm.
would have saved us a lot of internal grief in the initial stages of the implementation and kind of working out the initial challenges because um, I think I think we started with a little bit too informal of an approach. I think we saw something that was going to be a great tool and we're like, everybody's going to love this. It's super easy to learn. But then those little nuanced cases started to develop, and we didn't necessarily have enough quote unquote boots on the ground people who were able
Yeah.
to dive into those details and help us work the problem quickly. And we hit a bit of an efficiency bottleneck for a little while there.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I spent some time yesterday learning about how you can now use an AI agent as part of your telephony system. So, say you
Mhm.
had front desk people, members of staff who, you know, for a multitude of reasons, maybe they couldn't answer the call at a certain point, and you needed an agent to answer and take the answers to what you had on your lead tracker form. It's so interesting now that that's just something you can do. And actually, at the start of your guys' HubSpot journey, it wasn't an option. You couldn't have something built in. Well, you could have had like VO or something like that, but it would have been really difficult to have that set up and ready to go, right? And actually now with where agents have got to and how telephony systems that are cloud-based, how they've kind of moved along, that's probably something you could consider now, right? Is that front desk teams, before someone speaks to someone, actually they're filling out that lead tracker form. That information is going directly into HubSpot. Uh, the data is not wonky because it's a system taking information from a person, albeit, humans are better, but it won't be as wonky. And actually now you can do that piece. So also interesting that that wasn't there at the start of your guys' HubSpot journey, but the system's come such a long way since you all started. So even if I think about like, hey, what would we do differently? That would be a cool one to test out for sure. Um, just to, I guess, smooth out that process a little bit more. And there are so many learnings from it as well. So
Oh yeah.
definitely things you can build out into agents and that kind of thing. So yeah, very, very cool. Um, is that something you'd consider, Kyle? Or
Yeah,
are you
we've
all kind of
definitely
against that?
we've definitely toyed it with it a little bit. Where we got stuck was figuring out how to separate out so our referring offices
Hmm.
aren't also going through some sort of an agent because we work with them every day and a lot of times they're just calling us because they wanted to give us a treatment update or that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
we built what we called like the bat line. So it was, given out to our top referrals that we work with all the time and we know we
Hmm.
have continual collaboration going on. So we wanted to give them access to a way to reach us that as soon as that number kind of popped up and we saw that extension was ringing, we knew that was one of our, community collaborators and we should grab that call. And it
Hmm.
would keep them off of that system. So that was actually something that we've been playing with because we're trying to figure out, how can we maybe increase our scope of access for the patients without changing the experience of another client base that we don't want to influence.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
No, that's super, super cool. All right. So, like I said at the start, right, the best system in the world, completely useless if nobody uses it. Um, you all had existing processes that we worked with you on, and then you had processes that were brand new. How did you get buy-in from, I want to say specifically your like surgical team, because I guess generically it's not the user that you think would be in HubSpot, but I'm curious, how did you get buy-in from like wider teams and then specifically your surgical team?
Yeah. So in truth, at first we didn't. And it was really interesting for us because we thought this was going to be a slam dunk. It was a surgeon-led initiative to open
Hmm.
up to the D2C market. But then when
Hmm.
we started to explain the perceived increase in workload for them, it was kind of like I just want to do surgery,
Hmm.
and so it opened up this really interesting debate for us. But I'm actually really proud of how this organization went about it. So we actually ended up forming kind of around the same time two internal employee-based committees. They're our employee experience committee and our patient experience committee, and they're essentially just completely volunteer part of their job on top of their routine responsibilities. They're really passionate about one of these two fields and they wanted to participate. And what we started doing was we started bringing them into the conversation, and
Hmm.
fortunately, it worked out really organically that through no actual effort on our part as the leadership team, we have representatives from every sub department of the company in each committee.
Hmm.
And so when we said, hey, we have this new program, we have this new platform, we're trying to implement it, we want to make sure that it influences the employee experience and the patient experience as best as we can. Where are we getting it right? Where are we getting it wrong? And put that in front of them. They were very quick to tell us what they thought was going to work and what wasn't. And at first, it was very loud, but then we realized how constructive it was. And so we've been able to build off of that. And it became very iterative. And it became something where they would bring something to us. We would run through it, figure out, is that keeping us towards the goals that we're looking to achieve? Is that going to slow us down? What are we looking to get out of this? We might offer some sort of a counter suggestion, or we would keep playing with it with them. But they immediately felt that they were kind of representatives for the wider audience, whether it was the patients or the employees that they were working with. And so it very quickly became like we are their advocates and we are working with them. And it became clear culturally for the company that basically the message was we need a process and we need to make it easier for you. And then we also need to make it easier for our patients and our data processing.
Hmm.
And, I guess at that point we outlined kind of the start, middle, end, and the reason for every decision we were bringing into this. And as a result, we really started to feel a lot of buy-in. And for me, my perspective is that's really where a strong executive comes into the mix, right? So we're here for the cultural delivery. If I make every decision for the end user, whether that's the actual operator or whether that's the patient,
Yeah.
there's no way I'm going to get it right as often as if the end user plays that role. And then my job really comes in to confirm, compliance with regulations, alignment with company mission and values, determination of the when of the implementation, and then how it's going to be implemented and measured. And really that's where the relationship I think sits between the executive team and our operators. And in that regard, we've seen the highest level of success when we really learned how to build that cadence, which takes time. An
Hmm.
organization, they're going to feel like it's a really good feel good idea until they see it actually delivering their opinions become results. And then it
Yeah.
starts to really snowball and go faster. So for us, and I think Dia, you can probably attest, you watched us. We've been working with you what, since 2021, 22. We went through those iterations. There were periods where we were like, oh boy, what did we just do? But I mean, you saw the buy-in. It took some time, but we got there and it really snowballed. And so I think that's how we did it. That really ended up being most successful for us. And I think that why build it in a vacuum when you have so many other people who already are either experts in their field or understand the patient experience? And we're in healthcare, we're in
Hmm.
this because we want to help people. And I
Hmm.
think allowing them to express that passion in that way really helped us sell it. For us, it was kind of like that, like Simon Sinek, like, what's your why? you know, and
Hmm.
and speak to that first, and the rest kind of built out from there. So that's kind of how we did it, and I like to think that we as an organization are proud of that result.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that keeps running through my mind as you kind of talk through the adoption and the buy-in and how you approached it from a D2C perspective is just how human it is. Like something that you all didn't forget was the human nature of what you were trying to do and what you were trying to achieve. And having that kind of people first mentality, like how is this going to affect the end user? How is this going to affect the operator who is actually going to be in this system day to day? I think that, rings true for a lot of people, but I think the way you've articulated that today has been, I guess, eye-opening in most cases because not everyone thinks about it that way. We get so wrapped up in the process needs to be right, the system's not quite right, this field isn't where it's supposed to be, and that kind of stuff. And actually, you forget like who is using this and how are they intending to use it, and what are we actually trying to achieve here. So I really like your nod back to Simon Sinek there. That's a very, very apt reference. Look, I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. We've got 13 minutes left. Firstly, I've super appreciated how you've talked us through how, operationally you guys use HubSpot and how you rolled it out to your team and your customer. Um, but we are having this conversation during Pride Month. So it's one of my favorite times of year, like I said at the
Yeah.
start. And while today's conversation has been, I guess, centered a lot around systems, processes, and leadership, I genuinely think who we are inevitably shapes how we lead. So I'd love to talk about the human side for a moment, more personally, Kyle, if you don't mind. But tell me, what what does pride mean to you, and how is being part of the LGBTQIA plus community influence the way you think about leadership, communication, building teams, adopting processes? Maybe less about the processes. I will actually want to hear more about it from your perspective, because I think it really does shape how we do things, not just being part of the community, but also having that solidarity in community and not always having someone, like a mirror next to you that you can be like, hey, how would you approach this? Everyone approaches it differently, and then I think we have that edge that we also have to approach it differently as well. So, super curious, what does it mean to you, and how does it influence your leadership?
Most definitely. Yeah, I mean, Pride for me is really, it's a celebration, but it's also kind of a rally cry, right? And it's a celebration, of course, because there's been so much work that has taken place and has been done on our behalf, generations above us, and how many lives have been touched by that, or even frankly saved from the work that's been done, the efforts of those who came before us and continue to walk alongside us, whether they are, LGBTQIA plus individuals, whether they're allies, the work that they've put in has given us the privilege of being able to be a little bit um, louder about our personal pride for who we are and where we come from, and what makes us who we are. And but at the same time, it's also still a rally cry, right? Because I recognize there is a certain amount of privilege, even here in the States. I live in the Northeast, we are a quite open area of our country, but even abroad, there are people that someone somewhere is still very much in fear and they feel they are in danger. And in many ways, a lot of them have to kind of totally abandon their truth out of necessary survival, like out of that necessity to protect themselves.
Mm.
And for me, I kind of find myself like every year I almost start to treat Pride Month almost like a New Year's resolution for me. And every year I kind of start to ask myself, like, what am I setting for my intention? What's my resolution, for the next 12 months until the next Pride Month comes around, and I kind of reevaluate, how can I be a healthier version of myself in celebration of those who've set up a place for me to be healthy? How can I live my life more fully in gratitude for the work that's gone into me being capable and safe to be open about who I am as a gay man? And, where do I see opportunity to participate in the bigger picture? And where can I help to uplift members of my community? How can I participate in those things? And how can I make sure that, I guess, in a way, how do I make sure that because I'm in a position of privilege where I do feel comfortable and I have an incredible community around me and an incredible family and a workplace that's very LGBT plus affirming, how do I make sure that I'm not living that in vain? How am I making sure that I'm celebrating that in a way that's acknowledging that it's a blessing for me to be able to do that. And how do I make sure that it's something that it's not just something that I take for granted every day.
Hmm.
Uh, but in terms of communication and leadership and building teams, for me, coming out in that process was like a master class in learning how to communicate and lead. Um, Firstly for yourself and then for others. Because for me, I noticed, I found myself needing to go through kind of a series of acknowledgments. It was kind
Hmm.
of an iterative process of me getting to terms of, despite being in a supportive community, like I had to come to my own realization, coming of age, coming of understanding of who I was and what this part of me was and how I thought and how that might be different from others. And I needed to acknowledge that for myself. And then I needed to turn that attention over to how do I have this conversation with my peer group or with my family or with people who, you know, need guidance on that? Because honestly, I think all of us who've come out can probably have some level of exposure to this kind of idea of like when you come out, you almost have to like guide the conversation and provide some leadership and guidance on answering their questions, maybe setting some boundaries. You've got the people who, whether you want it or not, like this does change some of their perception, or maybe this opens up a flood of questions for them. Maybe it changes how they've seen you. Maybe this, people will say things like, oh, that doesn't change anything. Like, I don't see you any differently. And it's like, well, in any way, it kind of does. Like it still does change how you see me in certain perspectives, and maybe it's not for the worse, but it's definitely something that, I'm going to help you understand. And you do so by listening for the intention of understanding and understanding where they're at, especially if it's someone that you're investing your time into and it's someone whose relationship you have that you want to foster and keep and curate. And so you have to listen to understand where they're coming from, understand empathetically that they are also processing some information that you've had some time to process yourself. And, and my joke that I always say is like, it took me 21 years to fully get ready to have this conversation. I don't expect a 10-minute coming out conversation to fill
Yeah.
in all the gaps that you may have in your understanding and awareness. And that concept of being able to protect your own well-being and produce good, productive conversation for a common end goal,
Hmm.
to me, that just felt like a prime set of requirements to be a collaborator and a leader in the workplace and really in any setting. But it's made me a better friend. It's made me a better member of the community. And I just think that that idea of like learning that self-advocacy and also that common advocacy for that shared goal that you're hoping to achieve is just such an important lesson that I learned through that process of coming out and having those conversations and being fortunate to have a lot of people who were open to those kinds of conversations. I think is kind of how it shaped me as a leader. And I carry that idea over to how I manage my teams today. So that was a long-winded answer, but hopefully that was what you were looking for.
No, absolutely. And it it really is such a, I think someone put in the chat there, a graceful approach to even just communicating about it. I think as members of the queer community, we don't just have to do it once as well. You
Mhm.
maybe you come out once to your family and your parents if you're lucky enough to get to do that, but then you also then have to kind of do it at work, and then you start a new leadership position. You kind of have to tell your team about it, and then you kind of have to do it when you're socially networking. And so you don't have to do it, but it's such a big part of, I guess, people's identities. It's not their entire identity, but to know you is to really know the full you and the whole you. And so without a nod to it somewhere, whether it's in a leadership away or you're running an LGBTQIA plus hug, like it comes out in different ways and you do have to do it multiple times. So also that learning experience of okay, I did it this way last time, and actually, I don't need to do it this way next time. Maybe I don't need to do it at all, but the option is there, and I've done it before, so I know how to do it again. I think is such a big part of it as well.
For sure. Like I think it's so interesting the idea of like coming out almost feels very loud and direct in the early stages of your experience of coming out. And it gets to the point where it gets quieter and
Yes.
also like subtle in a way, like where you might mention your partner, or in like my case, I'll mention my boyfriend. And you kind of it's almost like, you hear like the little dog's ears like whoop, like what? And they catch attention to it.
Yeah.
Um and you're like, oh. that was my coming out for that person, and it clicks differently. But then everybody kind of moves on from it. And, maybe it's like a week later that they bring up like, oh, I didn't know you had a boyfriend, or what, it comes up kind of later. Yeah, Autumn, I see Autumn in the comments saying fellow queer people are screaming in joy when they pick up on those things. And yeah, it's 100%, I think there's like that little like internal dance where you're like, oh, I'm one
Yeah.
of my people, and it just like
Yeah.
you feel good. But yeah, I think it's interesting over time, like it's still continuous, it's still present,
Hmm.
but it really kind of changes to a more like it's a little bit quieter. It's not as eventful. It's natural, after a while. And I think that's something that we've also earned through the years of pride recognition and really acknowledging, who we are and the community we're a part of. So I think it's beautiful. Yeah.
Oh, I don't want to end the conversation, but we are unfortunately 3 minutes from time. I will quickly check with the group here if anyone has any questions. If you do, please unmute now, and if you don't, I'm going to wrap up here. I'll give it a second. Okay. There's some very, very beautiful comments in the chat there as well. Kyle, thank you so much for one, for joining us today, two, for being open and vulnerable and your whole self. And I think during the month of Pride and just generally speaking in, spaces like this, in professional settings like this, not everyone can. So I really appreciate you being able to do that here today with this group of people as well. Um, Fantastic conversation. I'm very, very excited for the next one. We will share programming in our Slack channel. If you're not in our Slack channel, maybe pop me a message on LinkedIn. I'll quickly put my LinkedIn in the chat here, or Karen, if you put yours in, or mine, whichever. Um, and we can kind of get connected there and invite you to our Slack community. Uh, the Slack community, we kind of post about the events. We are trying to revive it a little bit because it's been a little bit quiet, but just trying to recreate that space and have somewhere for people to just come and talk about HubSpot. Also, kind of shoot the conversation with like-minded people. I just remembered this was recording. Thank you again. I will quickly pop my LinkedIn in the chat here, and then we can all get connected. But Kyle, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a
We should do this
privilege.
again soon.
I loved it. Thank you very much for including me. Thanks. It was nice to meet everybody in the chat too, and we'll hopefully be in touch again in the future. I'll see you in the Slack chat.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great
Thank
rest of
you
your day.
guys.
Have a fantastic Pride Month, and we'll speak to you all soon. See ya.
Amazing. Bye,
Bye.
everybody.